talked several times about with education of the more things that you can learn across a broad knowledge base that's going to kind of expand your pyramid base. And a lot of that comes in, it gives you the vocabulary to kind of connect things and give you a full understanding of maybe a concept or a theory or something that you maybe not made sense before. So today we're going to kind of bring some economics into entrepreneurship and kind of supply and demand type curves. If you guys had econ, I can thank Dr. Strauss over at SLU for that. So what we want to talk about today is kind of something called the entrepreneurial perseverance curve. And so really it's if you've got your supply and demand curve, in general, you've got time and, what do we talk about that the entrepreneurs their goal is to make a difference in the world, to make an impact, right? And so, hypothetically, over time, you're going to make more of an impact if you're doing what you do well. And so when it starts out, you've got this level of passion that's extremely high. You've got this great idea that's going to make a real large impact on the world. But where's if you have passion on one line and you've got experience on the other, when you first start off, where's your experience level? It's all the way down here, right? So if this is your experience, so you've got this huge gap that's between what you think you can do and what you want to do and realistically what you can do. And so this is kind of a big gap of it's really just being naive. It's naivete. And so over time, though, you are going to get experience. And hopefully over time that experience is going to lead to you actually making an impact. What also happens over time, though, is especially early on when you're starting a new venture and you don't have much experience, those experiences usually aren't always positive. And so what ends up happening a lot of times is these experiences are really you getting your butt kicked. And so over time, that passion starts to wane and starts to wane and starts to wane until you get to this point here where there's really kind of an intersection here that this is kind of a major moment that happens in your business. And for a lot of times when passion now is reduced to the level of what your experience is, a lot of times this can happen in business, can become a breaking point. And so a couple things are going to happen, or a couple things can happen here. Is, one thing that could happen is you just kind of keep going through the motions until your business goes kersplat. Because if you're not passionate about what you're doing, it's not going to work. Another option, you could just say, to hell with this, I'm done. And your business goes kersplat, out of business. If you're out of business, you can't make any impact. The other option that can happen here is that this breaking point could actually become a pivot point. That, you see this with some of our clients that we work with, that they get to this point where they're just really kind of fed up with what's happening right there. So if up here you're the ultimate optimist, the world's great, the business is great, I'm going to go change the world, I got this. Then reality starts setting in, and as you start kind of going down this train, now you become a pessimist. The world sucks, the economy sucks, the jobs suck, the market sucks, I suck, the business sucks, everything sucks. And so this is where it's a real impetus for change for one of three ways. Either you're going to keep going through the motions, you're going to exit out of your business, or you realize that this is an opportunity to make a change in your business. And so if you take that opportunity to make a positive change in your business and pivot, you could potentially start kind of getting back in alignment to where you get up to here. And here, you're kind of, you become optimistically skeptical is kind of the term that I've given it. And so what I mean by optimistically skeptical is, we talked about in Idea Vortex, when you start out, you know that your idea isn't going to hit the goal straight on, that you have to kind of iterate. Do you guys remember that? And so optimistically skeptical really means that you know that the idea, the concept, whatever you're working on isn't going to work the way that you initially plan, but you also now have the experience and the knowledge and the passion to know that you're going to iterate and you're going to make it work. And so that's where you have to always be skeptical about your idea, because from A to Z is not going to really happen the way you think it's going to. But you also know that you have the confidence in your team and in yourself that you're going to make it work. And so what happens here is here you think you're going to change the world, and here you actually have the opportunity to actually do it. And that's where this point becomes so important. And we've talked about this being a kind of a point where some of our clients come to us because they now see there's an opportunity for something's got to give, something's got to change. And so when this point happens, it's really a point where something is going to change. And this also really takes place not just in an overarching business, but if you think from we talked about the perspective principle where you can kind of zoom in and zoom out, from a fractal perspective, so it's all a microcosm of the little things. And so realistically, along the way, you're having all of these little curves going on along the way. So it could be that a project that you're working on has this exact same scenario, and it's going to affect your experience and your passion specifically on that project. Brian and I were just talking about, you guys, the content team is making a wheel change. So if you think about the content team here is, they started out really excited about what they were doing, and it was going to be awesome, and it was going to change the world, and then they realized, hey, this may or may not be scalable. It may not be able to be replicated across a lot of people. So they made a pivot, because what were their options? They could have pivoted to try to make a change to make it better. They could have just said, no, content doesn't work the way we thought it was going to hell with it, we're done. Or they could have just kept going through the motions and just burning themselves out and not delivering the value that they know that they now can with this pivot. The same thing is with these initiatives that we're now launching. When we first start out, we're extremely excited about all these initiatives, but what we have to do is temper that and be optimistically skeptical and understand that along the way, things aren't going to work out like we 100% planned, but understand that we have the experience in this room and the team that can continue to pivot when necessary to make that happen. And so what you can't do is get frustrated when the first iteration doesn't work, and understand that that's part of the learning lesson. And so there's really, in economics, there's kind of two ways to change these curves. Is one, you can move the entire curve, and two, you can change the steepness of a curve. And so if you think about it from that perspective, if we've got this curve here that you've got here. So what is one way that that you could change this is for negatively, but you could say, well, if we don't start with passion as high, then it's not going to be as impactful, right? You're not going to be affected as much. And so if you move this curve down to here, what's the byproduct of that? What ends up happening if, in this scenario, what happens if passion doesn't start as high? You hit the point sooner.
Before you have the experience to get you out of the nosedive.
Right. Before you've actually learned enough to get it happen. So what happens here is you've lowered your tolerance to the amount of things you're willing to endure. When your passion is really high, you're willing to deal with more of these hurdles and humps and bumps in the road. But if your passion's not as high, you're more quickly probably going to exit out. So another scenario is if you have this as the starting point, and what do we talk about a lot of times is experience. You want to learn from other people's experience, right? So if this is our experience curve, and we move it up, and we're here, so what does that do?
You're still more excited when you hit the pivot point?
Right, so you're more excited about your idea when you hit your pivot point, and you're also able to not have to deal with as much stuff, and it's reduced the time, so you get there faster. So what are ways that you can that we currently do this? So a lot of the things that we learn. So where do we learn to systemize? Well, it's in organizations like EO. It's doing things experience-wise. This is why we do a lot of reading and a lot of because you can learn from a lot of other people's experience from books. And this is why we're doing Whiteboard Wisdoms, right? Is because we want to help other people learn faster. Ben, you had your hand up?
I was just gonna, you asked the question that I was gonna ask, which is explain a scenario where your experience is higher when you start, and I guess it's from learning from other people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there any other ways, like starting a business that you already know something about, or
right? So if you've already got experience in the industry, so this is why a lot of times, so like the success rate of entrepreneurs who start a business after they've worked in the industry for a long time, they know what they like, they know what they don't like. Their success rate is typically going to be a little bit higher because their experience curve is higher. Sometimes also that makes them jaded to the point where they're not as excited about the industry anymore. So really what a lot of times can happen there is your experience curve moves, but also your passion curve moves. So if you can temper that jadedness by still having love and a passion for your industry with the experience, that's when you're going to see positive results from that. So another potential way to affect this curve is if you've got your curves and you really focus on learning. And so not that you started out with more experience or anything like that, but now instead of moving the whole curve, the whole experience curve, it just kind of shifts so it's the steepness of it. So if you still start here, but now it kind of goes like this, now you've moved that point. This is where learning curve comes from, a steep learning curve. Well, what we just did here was we steepened the learning curve. Where do you guys see examples of this within our company, that we steepen the learning curve?
Could this be because we're not afraid of failing forward, so we make big changes instead of little changes?
Right. So we iterate quickly, and what do we make sure that we learn from those things. So we make sure to make sure that we're iterating and learning from those lessons that we're kind of moving forward from. So yeah, that's a good one. What else?
I would say the whole wheels, dials, and knobs concept that we've been looking at the last couple of weeks for sure.
Okay. So we take a systematic approach to learning, right?
Yep.
And paying attention. This is also where open book management comes in.
Mm-hmm.
And this Whiteboard Wisdom, every week we're learning. So what we're trying to do is steepen that learning curve so we can get to where we got to go faster. And then the opposite of that would be is if a lot of companies, so we work on the business a lot, and that's where you steepen this learning curve. A lot of companies don't do that. And so if you don't work on your business, what happens is this is going to go a lot flatter. And so if you don't work on the business, you don't pay attention, you don't focus on speeding up that education, you're just kind of going through the motions. You're out of passion a lot faster. So if you notice, so you've got your kind of your positive ones here and your negative ones here. If you notice, in both the positives, you have movement up and to the left. And so if you look at it from this perspective, if it comes down here, so the time that it takes to get to that point and the amount of impact, the amount of passion that you still have left is also up. So really what you're working on here is being happier faster, making a bigger impact faster. And so really, if you can combine both of those, and so if you've got these two combined, if you start here, and then you shift your experience curve, so you're learning from other people, you're trying to focus on getting that knowledge level up, and you're also iterating faster, and you're taking a systemized approach, and you're working on the business. And so if you move your starting point up to here, and you steepen that curve, that's where you kind of get the best of both. And that is why we are in business, is because this is the ideal situation to become more successful faster. And this is, in reality, what we do as a company. We are trying to share our lessons. We're trying to share people with experience. We're trying to share knowledge. We're trying to share how to be better in business. And we're also trying to get them to be better at their business so they can do more, do better, do faster. And so they can make a bigger impact in a shorter amount of time. And the more people we can do that for, the more we can influence them changing the world. And so this is how we do being the champion of the everyday entrepreneur, is by not only shifting their learning curve up, by also making it steeper. So this is economics meets entrepreneurship. Kale.
Brandon's always talking about a specific client who, and it's right at that point, like you said, the breaking point. And it's a lot of times when clients come in and we just end up meeting with them, some of them. And I think this is purpose for this client. He came in, and after we met with him, talked to them, went through it all, he said we reinvigorated his passion for the business.
Yep.
And we're doing a lot to work with him right now. And I think we're at the point where we're going to see if his experience, if that curve is going to get to the point to change the world.
Yeah. And so that example was, I showed him a very reduced version of this because he had gotten to the point where his business sucked. I thought I could do this. It's just not working. Our industry sucks. The economy sucks. He was just frustrated and just was about to, just like, this is just stupid. It's not what I thought it was going to be. I should have done this. I should have done that. Talking several years ago. And that's, you can't live life looking in the rearview mirror. But where one of his pivot points came was realizing, coming up a level perspective-wise, and seeing where he was on this chart, and understanding that he wasn't alone, that this is a natural thing that happens in business. It's a natural thing that happens in psychology. And when he was able to come up a perspective and kind of see it for what it was, he then took ownership of it and could run with it. And so that's where we were able to reinvigorate him and re-empowerize him, was because we were able to give him perspective. We were able to kind of shift his view on his business and his industry and his life, and which was pretty cool.
And I think that another benefit to that, to back this up for us when we're talking with business clients, is that we've been there before.
Yeah,
for sure.
We're there.
So yeah.
I know I've personally had, from a company standpoint, 3 or 4 of these, and they'll continue to come. But what you hope is when they're higher up, they are more very, very prevalent pivot points and not ever breaking points. We'll probably come across another breaking point or 3 in our lifetime. But what we hope is that they happen higher up, and that we can attack them with a pivot point attitude of, okay, how can we transition to make our business better? And that's where we've talked several times about the innovator's dilemma, which I guess we'll probably have to do a whole one on at some point. But innovator's dilemma, is if we at some point became complacent with our business model and didn't keep innovating and didn't keep moving forward, but we just started protecting, then that's going to allow this pivot point to drift down, because we're not learning as quickly. So that curve is going to flatten out. And so that's where we've got to keep pushing the envelope on keep innovating and keep pushing and keep this happening instead of that happening. Dennis?
And to go along with Kale too, I think there's an aspect of not just increasing their knowledge and increasing it faster, but we also give them some energy and get them excited about their business again, to where we're shifting that passion curve up a little bit, and it's meeting even higher and faster.
Yeah, so if we can do the opposite of this one and move that passion curve up and learning curve up and experience up, then that actually, you're right, that would be the ideal. So if we can move this one up also, and then we're up even higher. That's the point. Ben?
I was going to ask if there's any scenario when they were a straight line, or if there's an optimal position where the passion and the knowledge are equal.
So you're saying if they both flattened out?
Yeah, does that ever happen?
I doubt it. Haven't thought about it, but if you think about it, your experience is always going to, if you think about it from this perspective, if your experience line is flat, that means you're really just going through the motions, because at that point your experience isn't making you better. So if your experience isn't growing you, if it's not making you better, then that's not going to help. If by you mean that they can run parallel, then yeah, I think that is this scenario here where your passion line can follow your experience line,
Okay, yeah.
and then the more you learn, the more excited you get. The more, I mean, I think you can see that played out. Like when you start understanding that what you're doing is going to be an evolutionary iteration process, and that you just keep learning and keep growing, and you become more excited the more you learn, the more you do.
I think that I was getting thrown off because the passion was just like it's coming down.
Yeah.
But I think it's just because the marker is darker and I can't see the orange dot.
Gotcha. Yeah. So it's at that's where if you pivot as opposed to break.
Like, is there something you can, like, to foreshadow that breaking point coming? Like, because said client was like, yeah, I actually got a hold of you guys like 5 months ago. Like, is there, if somebody sees this and they're like, oh, it makes sense, it's kind of there, what signs are that breaking point is like coming?
So it's really when you start transitioning. So this is a slow transitional process, and that's where the boiling frog thing comes into play. If you put a frog in the boiling water, it hops out. But if you put it in and just turn it on and it brings it up to boil, you get frog legs. So it's the same thing. This doesn't happen overnight. Like, you don't go from my idea is going to be the most awesome thing that's ever come in this industry to this was done overnight. Like, it's a slow process. And so what it really comes down to is it's about self-awareness. And when you start seeing the pessimistic thoughts kind of more dominating your optimistic thoughts. So, there's a point, if you're at a halfway point kind of right here where it's about 50-50, where it's like some days you feel like you can change the world and some days you feel like the world is changing you. There's a point where that kind of the scales tip to where you're having more negative thoughts than positive thoughts. And that's when you know that you're heading in this direction. And so it's really about self-awareness and then having the discipline to know that that's coming and that something's got to give, something's got to change. So then how are you going to make a change? Is it by, in that customer's instance, by reaching out to us because then we were able to kind of do these things for him? Or is it by, self-inflicted pivots of, you got to change something in your business model, you got to do something different. But it has to start with, the first step in AA is you have to admit that you have a problem, and so that's the same concept here is no one can make you make a change in your business. No one can make you change the way you think on a project that you're doing. You have to have that self-awareness to come up a level and look at yourself objectively and say, here's what's happening, here's what's going on. Something's got to give and make that change.